Fear is a powerful and complex emotion. So complex, in fact, that you may not even realize when you're experiencing it or expressing it. Oprah and Dr. Brene Brown, a research professor who studied vulnerability, worthiness, shame, and courage, talk about fear and what it really means to be afraid on a 2013 episode of Super Soul Sunday. People buy into fear and feel fear because they don't have the language to attach to what it is, Dr. Brown says. In the clip, Oprah recalls the first time Marianne Williamson was on the Oprah Winfrey Show and discussed fear. She said, all the men in the audience were like, well, I'm not afraid of anything. I ain't scared of nobody, I ain't scared of nothing, Oprah remembers. I think people don't understand that anxiety is fear, jealousy is fear, greed is fear, all of those elements of a fear-based culture. Dr. Brown agrees. She says, eating is fear, drinking is fear, drugs are fear, rage is fear. I drive by big trucks sometimes in Texas and they have that sticker on the back that says, ain't scared, or something like that. And I think, love and light to you, you are in so much fear. Because when you put ain't scared on your car, you are scared. You're telling the world, Oprah says. Yeah, Dr. Brown says, we're all afraid. We just have to get to the point where we understand it doesn't mean that we can't also be brave. So I have a two-part sermon for you today. The first part is about the benefits of fear, and the second is about fear and Unitarian Universalism. So part one. I am not a fear junkie. I have a hard enough time being alone in my house at night, so you will never go see me going to a haunted house or watching scary movies by myself. Whew. But listening to a frightening novel in a fast-moving car with no closets or beds for the boogeyman to spring out from, and I tend to get a little bit braver. Once a year or so, Leo and the kids and I make the long trek up north to Connecticut to visit his family. It takes us about 13 hours to get there, and we prefer to drive at night while the kids are asleep. You can understand, I'm sure. As you can imagine, fighting off our own sleep is a serious feat. It's become tradition for Leo and I to pick out a Stephen King novel to download and listen to for the long, dark trek. Whether it's Dr. Sleep, Bag of Bones, or Mr. Mercedes, the sheer terror of each book has served to keep us awake as the miles pass beneath our feet. This tradition, though, is less about feeling brave and more about staying awake. The fear serves as a motivator, pushing us along at a reasonable pace and making the time pass quickly. And so in this instance, I am grateful for the heart-pounding scares. But let's face it, fear has a pretty bad rap. With quotes like Roosevelt's, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and Aristotle's, he who has overcome his fears will truly be free. It is easy to imagine fear as a one-dimensional emotion. If we only experienced fear as a negative sensation, we would decide to quickly overcome it, and ideally, do everything we could not to experience it in the first place. But like a Stephen King novel pushing you towards your destination, fear can benefit us too. For some, being frightened is a rush, a way to thrust yourself beyond your imagined limits. It can also be a warning signal, a guide for how to survive our world, an acknowledgement of growth opportunities, and even a source of motivation. Let's start with that first benefit, the rush. Have you ever jumped out of an airplane, bungee jumped, gone whitewater rafting down a class 5 or class 6 rapid, gone on a traveling fair's roller coaster, played chicken, or maybe even gone to bed after 8 p.m.? I got some of you with that last one. If so, I'm sure you can understand the rush of excitement you get when you think you cannot possibly do something, and then suddenly you're doing it. In this case, fear is your friend. Without it, these adventures would be the norm and as boring as brushing your teeth. The second benefit of fear is that it serves as a warning system. Fear is a primal drive. It's one of the main catalysts of our very evolution. helping our ancestors to sense danger and avoid it. From an evolutionary perspective, the emotion of fear protected humans from predators and other threats to the survival of the species. So it's no wonder that certain dangers evoked that emotion, since fear helps protect you and is therefore adaptive, functional, and necessary. A fascinating component of our evolution of fear is found in the hypothesis that dream consciousness is essentially an ancient biological defense mechanism, evolutionarily designed for its capacity to repeatedly simulate threatening events. In other words, we dream frightening dreams so that if we ever experience them in person, we'll have a better idea of how to handle them. They're preparing us for the zombie apocalypse. Along with my annual Stephen King listening, I've been tuning into a lot of podcasts lately. In preparation for Halloween, I've been diligently listening to one in particular by the name of Spooked. Supposed real-life stories, you guessed it, spooky occurrences told first-handed by people who experienced them. In one episode, we hear a young woman share a horrifying story about camping in a national forest with two of her girlfriends. They come upon a man with a dog while they're out enjoying the hot springs late in the afternoon. Eventually they realize something sinister is afoot, and after they hear the dog barking and see the man's flashlight in the woods later that night, they run for several miles as fast as they can to eventual safety, all the while hearing the bark of the dog with each step that they take. The woman telling the story says she was afraid of everything afterwards, afraid of being alone, of being outside, and of dogs barking. It wasn't until she went to a tarot card reader she was able to experience a strange transition to gratitude for her fear. Not only had it kept her running faster and longer than she could have ever imagined, but that horrible, incessant dog barking that had kept her awake at night afterwards transformed to gratitude as well. The tarot card reader said, that dog could have reached you at any time, but instead it warned you. Fear can show up as that small, still voice inside you, giving you answers if you just listen to it. It can be like a guidepost on a deep, darkened trail, showing you the safest way to go, helping you find your way. Another benefit of fear is using it as a roadmap to personal growth. A quote from an unknown author says, "Your largest fear carries your greatest growth." And I don't know about you, but I certainly feel the truth of that. We may experience fear when speaking in public, or learning a new technology, or some other moment when we step outside of our comfort zones. I've shared with some of you my experiences during my internship when my mentor and I identified areas in ministry which stirred up my nerves and my fear. I felt relieved at having shared it with him, convinced that he would understand and take pity on my poor soul. But of course, his immediate response was, "Well, guess what you're doing next Sunday?" In his wisdom, he knew that to stop short of my fears was to inhibit my growth. And so he gently pushed, and he was right. Our last benefit to fear is that people are driven by it. This can be a good and a bad thing, of course. Sometimes our fear drives us to make horrible, irrational decisions. Decisions made out of fear of being alone, fear of a broken heart, even fear of succeeding. Fear can keep us from living out our potential, from falling in love, finding happiness, taking that new job, or moving to your dream city. But fear can be a strong motivator to go for those very same things. Think of all the ways that fear has motivated you in your life. Fear of homelessness or poverty may have contributed to your desire to work hard in your career. Fear of jail may have helped you to make good decisions throughout your life. Fear of injury or loss of life may have helped you to drive safer or behave more cautiously in potentially dangerous situations. Fear may have trained your instincts up to notice minuscule, easily overlooked things which ultimately kept you safe. So it's good to take inventory of your fears, to examine which are worthy of a second look, a moment of gratitude, and which are there to keep you safe and help you find your way. Part 2. Fear is all around us. In fact, we have built whole industries, discovered entire medical diagnoses, formulated laws and policies, and some would argue created a plethora of religions to assuage our fears. I've often considered, perhaps like some of you, and certainly like many of my colleagues, why Unitarian Universalists do not have a bigger following in our country. After all, our message is love, acceptance, and freedom to believe as you will. Basically, our most treasured national values. It seems like an obvious fit for this country. But then I remember, we do not sell fear. We do not scream hellfire and damnation from our pulpit, but quite literally the opposite. We do not believe you are an immoral person if you do not believe in God. We do not find you suspicious if you don't attend church. Fear, as you can tell, is not in our traditional religious vocabulary these days. And while we're not alone in this, it can certainly feel like we are a minority. That's because fear is seemingly inseparable from religion. In his 1927 lecture, Why I Am Not a Christian, delivered to the South London branch of the National Secular Society, Bertrand Russell famously said, "Religion is based primarily and mainly upon fear. It is partly the terror of the unknown, and partly the wish to feel that you have a kind of elder brother who will stand by you in all your troubles and disputes. Fear is the basis of the whole thing. Fear of the mysterious, fear of defeat, fear of death." Now you may be thinking he's a bit of a pessimist. Certainly there are other reasons for religion. And there are. Organized religion endures partly because of the need for community, the need to recognize important milestones in our lives, to have a more organized way to impact our world for good in most cases. But religion, before it was organized, well, religion in its infancy, well, it's hard to argue against its foundation of fear. Judith Leaf, a well-respected Buddhist teacher, says that the essential cause of our suffering and anxiety, according to Buddhism, is ignorance of the nature of reality and craving and clinging to something illusory. That is referred to as ego, and the gasoline in the vehicle of ego is fear. Ego thrives on fear. So Buddhism, it would seem, was founded in part on the hope of delivering humanity from fear. The wrath of God sounds like a contradiction to many Unitarian Universalists, but in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it is still an appropriate term for some pieces of scripture and in some houses of worship. After all, God is both Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And as the verse continues, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. That's in Exodus. Dang, Yahweh, that's cold. Which are we to understand Yahweh to be then? If I thought each sin I committed would be punishable unto my great-great-grandchildren, out of caution alone I would give credence to the latter, and therefore my relationship with my deity might be driven by fear. This is what Russell was referring to when he said fear is a symptom of religion. In particular, doctrines of punishment in both this life and the next cause believers to live in fear unnecessarily. I could go on, but you get the idea. Fear plays an important role in almost every religion. I have wondered if our fearlessness as you use, often seen as a point of pride for us, is also a potential downfall. I mean, is it bad business to motivate by love rather than fear? If no one on earth believed they were going to spend an eternity in hell, we would have accomplished the goal of spreading our message. But would we then cease to exist? I hope and believe the answer is no, because frankly, fear was the driving change that led us to the creation of Unitarianism and Universalism in their own rights. If you think about it, one was finished with fearing God. They believed that God was all-loving. That was Universalism. And the other feared where blind faith might lead us. That was Unitarianism. Fear was our foundation, just in a different way. And just because we still don't believe in hell now, doesn't mean we have escaped fear. We may think we have because we don't fear an eternal sunburn, but we do fear life on Earth. In fact, I would wager that most, if not all of us, are here today because we worry about this world. Because we are fearful of what might happen if values like ours somehow died or became marginalized in a real way. We fear that rationality will lose out to fallaciousness, that humankind will be so short-sighted we will forget how interconnected we really are at the sacrifice of our Earth. We fear that we will no longer be able to look at one another in the eye and see each other's humanity, our dignity, our potential for goodness. Yes, I think we use fear a great deal. And that fear is perhaps one of several motivators to come here each Sunday. Fear is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it encourages us to buckle down and work hard for what we want to see come to fruition. Without it, there would be no heroes, no one rising to the occasion, and perhaps even no UUs. In a world without end, may it be so. Amen.